Let's talk about something that often flies under the radar, but has a significant impact on both your sleep quality and your ability to recover and grow muscle: what you eat before bed. Most people understand that sleep is a critical time for muscle recovery and hormonal regulation. During deep sleep, specifically during slow wave sleep, we see an increase in growth hormone secretion. This is essential for tissue repair, muscle hypertrophy, and overall cellular restoration. But what if I told you that a common nighttime habit might be short-circuiting that entire process? I'm referring specifically to eating high sugar or high fat meals within 2 hours of going to sleep. Here's why. When you ingest a high carb or high fat meal late in the evening, you trigger a cascade of metabolic responses. Insulin levels spike, glucose metabolism shifts, and most importantly, core body temperature rises. Now, the body needs to cool down by about 102 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate and sustain deep sleep. Elevating core body temperature from digestion counters that process, making it harder to transition into deep sleep stages. So right away, we're impairing the very sleep architecture that supports muscle recovery. Then there's the effect on growth hormone. That large insulin spike actually blunts growth hormone release. Growth hormone and insulin are somewhat antagonistic in their relationship. When insulin is high, growth hormone secretion tends to be suppressed. So by eating that sugary dessert or fatty meal before bed, you're not just making it harder to sleep, you're directly interfering with your body's ability to produce the hormones that help you recover and grow. There's also a neurological component to consider. Late night eating, especially of processed or sugary foods, disrupts the natural timing of your circadian clock. It sends a signal to your brain that it's still active daytime. This desynchronizes the central circadian pacemaker in the suprachiasmatic nucleus from peripheral clocks throughout the body, particularly in the liver and digestive system. That internal desynchronization leads to poor sleep efficiency and reduced REM and slow wave sleep, both of which are critical for neuroplasticity and physical recovery. And finally, there's the gut-brain axis. When digestion is actively ongoing late at night, there's increased activity in the enteric nervous system, which can drive low-grade arousal signals to the brain, fragmenting sleep cycles and reducing sleep depth. Even if you think you're getting your 8 hours, the quality of those hours is drastically diminished. So if muscle growth, cognitive performance, and high-quality sleep are priorities for you, which they should be, it's crucial to stop eating at least 2 to 3 hours before bed. Let your body cool down, stabilize insulin levels, and enter that deep, restorative state that allows your nervous system and musculature to truly recover. Simple change, big impact. When we think about optimizing muscle growth and recovery, most of the focus tends to fall on training intensity, protein intake, and perhaps supplementation. However, one factor that often goes overlooked is how sleep quality directly governs these recovery and anabolic processes. A particularly underappreciated disruptor of sleep is the act of eating, especially heavy or high-calorie meals, too close to bedtime. The physiological consequences of this are surprisingly profound, particularly when it comes to core body temperature and its essential role in sleep initiation and maintenance. The human body operates on a circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle regulated by the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. This internal clock controls numerous biological processes, one of which is thermoregulation. As we approach the evening, core body temperature begins to drop. This decrease is not incidental. It is a fundamental biological signal that cues the brain and body to transition into sleep mode. The drop in core temperature helps initiate sleep and supports its progression into the deeper, more restorative stages. In fact, this temperature decrease is considered one of the strongest physiological signals to initiate sleep onset. Now, here's where late night eating becomes problematic. The process of digestion inherently increases metabolic activity, and this raises core body temperature. The body begins to work harder to break down food, particularly if that food is high in fat or carbohydrates, which are metabolically demanding to process. When we eat a large meal within an hour or two before bed, we're asking our body to engage in digestion right when it should be shifting toward rest and recovery. This digestive activity increases thermogenesis, heat production, at the very time the body should be cooling down. The result is a delay in the natural drop in core temperature, which makes it harder to fall asleep, and even when sleep does occur, it tends to be lighter and more fragmented. This is not just about comfort. A sustained elevation in core body temperature is closely linked to reductions in slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative sleep stage. During slow-wave sleep, the brain is relatively quiet while the body engages in tissue repair, immune function enhancement, and hormone release, particularly growth hormone, which is critical for muscle repair and hypertrophy. If your body temperature remains elevated due to late-night digestion, You may experience shorter duration or lower quality, slow-wave sleep, thereby impairing these vital recovery processes. The thermoregulatory effect of food is compounded by what type of food is consumed. Meals high in saturated fats or refined carbohydrates tend to produce a more pronounced thermogenic effect, leading to greater disruption in the cooling process. Additionally, these macronutrients can trigger significant insulin responses, further interacting with hormonal signals tied to the sleep-wake cycle. So when you combine the thermogenic impact of digestion with the hormonal disruptions caused by late-night eating, you end up creating a biological environment that is far from optimal for quality sleep or effective muscle recovery. This may explain why people often report feeling physically restless or mentally alert after eating large meals before bed. It's not purely psychological, it's physiological. Your body is literally revving up when it should be powering down. Studies using core temperature monitoring and polysomnography, clinical-grade sleep tracking, consistently show that subjects who consume large meals late in the evening exhibit higher sleep latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, more nighttime awakenings, and reduced time spent in deep sleep stages. Over time, this can accumulate into chronic sleep debt, leading to impaired physical performance, slower muscle recovery, and even decreased motivation to train. Another important point is that core body temperature is not isolated to the torso or internal organs. It influences skin temperature gradients, blood flow, and even brain temperature. Elevated brain temperature, in particular, can interfere with the brain's ability to cycle through the different stages of sleep properly. The preoptic area of the hypothalamus, which regulates both sleep and thermoregulation, becomes less effective when it is operating under conditions of elevated temperature. This area essentially acts as a thermostat for sleep initiation, and when it's overridden by digestion-driven heat, it fails to send out the proper signals to induce the transition from wakefulness to sleep. Athletes and individuals who are highly physically active need to pay special attention to this. The stress of training already elevates core temperature temporarily. If you layer on a late, heavy meal after evening workouts, you are doubling down on the body's thermogenic load. Instead of promoting recovery, you're potentially prolonging sympathetic nervous system activity and delaying the parasympathetic rebound needed for deep relaxation and muscle repair. This is particularly relevant for those who train in the evenings and then refuel right before bed. While replenishing glycogen and protein is important, the timing needs to be strategic. Pushing that recovery meal earlier in the evening, ideally 2 to 3 hours before sleep, can allow the body to begin the cooling process before you even lie down. In short, if your goal is to maximize sleep quality, muscle growth, and recovery, you need to consider the thermoregulatory impact of your pre-sleep behaviors. Eating too close to bedtime doesn't just affect your digestion. It interferes with one of the body's most fundamental sleep mechanisms, the ability to lower its core temperature and initiate deep, restorative sleep. This isn't just theoretical, it's grounded in neuroscience, chronobiology, and sleep physiology. Making a simple shift in your eating schedule can dramatically improve not only how well you sleep, but how effectively your body repairs, grows, and prepares for the next day's training stress. When we consider the relationship between nutrition and recovery, especially in the context of muscle growth, one often overlooked factor is the hormonal interplay that occurs after we eat. Specifically, what happens when we consume a high carbohydrate or high fat meal before bed has significant consequences on insulin and growth hormone dynamics. These hormonal shifts may seem subtle in the moment, but over time they can meaningfully impair your body's ability to recover, repair, and build muscle. Growth hormone GH is one of the most critical anabolic hormones in the human body. It's secreted in pulses, with the largest and most consistent pulse occurring shortly after sleep onset, typically within the first 2 hours of deep sleep. This is when your body initiates the majority of its overnight repair processes, from cellular regeneration to protein synthesis. GH supports the breakdown of fat for energy lipolysis, enhances muscle protein synthesis, and helps repair damaged tissue. In the context of athletic training or resistance-based exercise, this nighttime surge in growth hormone is non-negotiable. It's your body's way of healing, rebuilding, and strengthening. However, this system is highly sensitive to insulin, a hormone most commonly known for regulating blood glucose. After you consume a meal, especially one rich in carbohydrates or fats, your pancreas releases insulin in response to rising blood sugar levels. Insulin's primary role is to shuttle glucose into cells for energy or storage, but it also affects a range of other hormones, including growth hormone. In fact, there is a somewhat antagonistic relationship between insulin and GH. When insulin is elevated, such as after a late night meal, growth hormone secretion is suppressed. The science behind this is clear. Several studies using hormonal assays and sleep monitoring have shown that when subjects consume a high-carb meal within an hour or two of going to bed, their endogenous growth hormone pulse is significantly blunted. This means less recovery, less fat breakdown, and reduced muscle protein synthesis during the night. The mechanism appears to be related to how insulin interacts with somatostatin, a hormone that inhibits growth hormone release. Elevated insulin levels promote somatostatin activity, further dampening GH secretion. The problem is even more pronounced with meals high in simple carbohydrates or refined sugars. These foods cause a rapid and substantial spike in blood glucose, which is followed by an equally strong insulin response. That insulin spike doesn't just impact glucose, it interferes with your entire hormonal cascade for the evening. If you're eating things like sweetened yogurts, pastries, pasta, or even large quantities of rice or bread before bed, you may be inadvertently turning off your body's natural anabolic window. It's important to recognize that even if you're consuming enough protein, hitting your macros, and training hard, the hormonal environment in which those nutrients are processed matters. Nutrients don't act in a vacuum, they interact with your physiological state. If your insulin is high and your growth hormone is low, the net result is reduced anabolic signaling. Your body is more likely to store nutrients as fat, less likely to break down fat for energy, and far less efficient at building muscle overnight. This isn't about short-term fluctuations. Over weeks and months, this can translate to slower recovery, less lean mass gain, and potentially more fat accumulation, especially visceral fat, which has its own health consequences. There's also the issue of nutrient partitioning. Growth hormone plays a key role in determining how nutrients are allocated, whether they're used for repair, energy, or storage. When GH is active, there is a bias toward using fat for energy and directing amino acids toward tissue repair. When GH is suppressed and insulin is high, there's a stronger bias toward fat storage and less efficient protein utilization. So even if you're taking in the right nutrients, they may be going to the wrong places or being used inefficiently simply because the hormonal signals are not aligned with the goals of recovery and muscle growth. Another factor to consider is the feedback loop between sleep architecture and hormone release. A late-night meal that elevates insulin and suppresses GH doesn't just have a one-time effect. Disrupted GH secretion can impair the quality of slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage of non-REM sleep. And when slow-wave sleep is compromised, the next night's hormonal patterns are more likely to be disrupted again. This creates a reinforcing cycle. Poor food timing leads to hormonal dysregulation, which leads to poor sleep, which further disrupts hormonal rhythms the next day. Over time, this creates a state of chronic low-grade dysfunction that can seriously undermine athletic performance, body composition, and overall well-being. Timing then becomes crucial. To allow the natural growth hormone pulse to occur as it should, insulin needs to be at baseline or at least significantly reduced by the time you go to bed. This typically requires a gap of at least 2 to 3 hours between your last meal and sleep. During that time, insulin levels fall. The body begins to shift into a recovery-focused parasympathetic state, and the hormonal conditions are optimized for growth hormone secretion and deep sleep. If you need to eat after a late workout, choose a small, protein-dominant meal with minimal carbs or fat to minimize insulin response and still support muscle repair. In summary, when you eat before bed, especially if it's a high-carb or high-fat meal, you elevate insulin levels at precisely the time your body needs them to be low. This hormonal disruption directly interferes with the nighttime growth hormone surge that is critical for muscle recovery and growth. It might feel insignificant in the short term, but over time, consistently eating before bed can slow your progress, reduce recovery quality, and increase fat storage. If your goals include optimizing your body's ability to recover, grow, and perform, then respecting the hormonal timing of sleep and nutrition is just as important as your training program itself. Your body runs on a tightly controlled internal schedule. This is your circadian rhythm. It governs everything from hormone release and body temperature to digestion and cognitive performance. Most people associate circadian rhythm with sleep-wake cycles, which is accurate, but what many don't realize is that this rhythm doesn't just exist in the brain. In fact, every major organ in your body, your liver, your muscles, your gut, even your fat tissue, has its own internal clock. These clocks work together in synchrony, aligned primarily by light exposure, but also heavily influenced by when you eat. So when you eat late at night, especially right before bed, you're not just changing how your body digests food, you're disrupting the harmony between these internal clocks. That desynchronization can significantly impair sleep quality and, as a result, hinder muscle recovery and growth. Your central circadian clock resides in the suprachiasmatic nucleus (SCN) of the brain. It is most sensitive to light cues, particularly the natural cycles of sunlight and darkness. This master clock tells your body when it's time to be alert and when it's time to rest. However, your peripheral clocks, such as those in the liver and digestive system, respond strongly to food intake. So when you eat, especially large meals or meals high in fat and carbohydrates, you reset the timing of those peripheral clocks. This isn't a problem when you're eating during the day, aligned with natural activity and light. But when you eat late at night, your peripheral clocks become misaligned with the central clock in your brain. Essentially, your brain is preparing for rest while your digestive system is preparing for work. This internal misalignment has a ripple effect across numerous systems. This conflict confuses your body. When your brain is trying to slow down and transition into sleep, your gut and liver receive signals that it's time to digest and metabolize food. The result is a state of internal conflict where different parts of your body are operating on different schedules. That mismatch leads to inefficient digestion, elevated nighttime metabolism, increased cortisol production, and most importantly, disrupted sleep cycles. It may not feel like a big deal if it happens occasionally, but if eating late becomes a habit, your internal misalignment becomes chronic. Over time, this can lead to a persistent reduction in sleep quality, poor glucose regulation, increased fat storage, and impaired muscle repair. When your circadian rhythm is aligned, your body naturally releases melatonin in the evening, a hormone that promotes sleepiness and helps prepare you for deep, restorative sleep. But melatonin release is sensitive not only to light but also to metabolic signals. Late night eating suppresses melatonin and delays its onset. This makes it harder to fall asleep and delays the entry into deep sleep stages, which are critical for muscle recovery and hormonal balance. In particular, slow wave sleep, the phase in which growth hormone is most strongly secreted, is especially vulnerable to disruption when melatonin signaling is impaired. So the effects are both direct and indirect. Not only are you getting less deep sleep, but the very processes that make sleep valuable for recovery are being interrupted. There's also a neurological layer to consider. Eating activates neural pathways in the brain that are associated with alertness and wakefulness. The act of digestion sends signals up the vagus nerve to the brainstem, indicating that the body is processing nutrients and needs to stay alert. These signals don't just stop because you lie down. They persist for hours, depending on the size and content of the meal. So even if you manage to fall asleep, your brain remains in a lighter, more fragmented state of sleep, which prevents you from entering the deeper phases where true recovery occurs. This effect is especially strong when eating processed or sugary foods, which cause sharp spikes and drops in blood glucose. These fluctuations can trigger arousals during the night, leading to micro-awakenings that you may not remember in the morning, but which greatly reduce sleep quality. Furthermore, late-night eating has been shown to delay the expression of key genes involved in circadian rhythm regulation. These are the so-called clock genes that operate on a feedback loop across 24-hour cycles. When these genes are thrown off schedule, it doesn't just affect sleep, it affects metabolism, immune function, muscle repair, and even emotional regulation. For athletes or anyone engaged in consistent training, this means that eating late can blunt the adaptive response to exercise. Your muscles repair less efficiently, your inflammation levels stay elevated longer, and your performance may subtly decline over time. There's also the behavioral feedback loop that late-night eating can create. When your sleep is disrupted, you wake up feeling more tired, less insulin sensitive, and more likely to crave high-calorie, high-carbohydrate foods. This sets you up to eat poorly the next day, potentially pushing your meals later again and perpetuating the cycle of circadian misalignment. It becomes harder to maintain a consistent training schedule, harder to stay lean, and harder to perform well physically or mentally. What began as a harmless late snack can evolve into a full-blown disruption of your body's rhythm and resilience. All of this leads to a simple but important point: timing matters. The time at which you eat can be just as important as what you eat. If your goal is to optimize sleep quality, support muscle recovery, and maintain metabolic health, eating earlier in the evening is critical. Giving your body at least 2 to 3 hours between your last meal and bedtime allows your peripheral clocks to align with your central clock. It allows your core temperature to drop, melatonin levels to rise, and your brain to transition smoothly into deep, uninterrupted sleep. And it supports the hormonal and neurological conditions that enable true recovery, not just in terms of how you feel, but at the cellular level where muscle repair, hormone regulation, and tissue regeneration occur. The human body is intricately wired with a constant stream of communication taking place between the brain and various organ systems. One of the most significant communication networks is the gut-brain axis, a two-way signaling pathway that connects your gastrointestinal system with your central nervous system. While this axis plays a role throughout the day in regulating mood, hunger, and immune responses, it takes on a different and particularly disruptive role when activated during the night. When you eat close to bedtime, you stimulate this gut-brain communication loop at precisely the time your body should be winding down. This can interfere with your ability to enter and maintain deep, restorative sleep, and over time, this disruption can significantly impact muscle recovery, hormonal balance, and overall well-being. To understand how this works, it's important to know that the gut is not just a passive digestive organ. It contains its own complex neural network known as the enteric nervous system, sometimes referred to as the second brain. This network includes millions of neurons that operate semi-independently but are also in constant dialogue with the brain via the vagus nerve and other pathways. When food enters the digestive tract, the enteric nervous system becomes highly active. It sends a steady stream of signals to the brain, regulating enzyme production, motility, and nutrient absorption. This process is essential during waking hours, but it becomes problematic when initiated late at night. Eating triggers a cascade of physiological responses, including the release of digestive hormones like gastrin, cholecystokinin, and ghrelin. These hormones not only influence digestion, but also interact with the brain and central nervous system. For example, ghrelin, which is known for stimulating hunger, also has activating effects on brain centers involved in alertness and cognitive function. When these hormonal and neural signals are active at night, they create a state of physiological arousal. This runs counter to the body's natural process of slowing down and preparing for sleep, and it can keep the brain in a semi-alert state even after you've gone to bed. The disruption doesn't necessarily manifest as full awakenings, although that can happen. More often, it appears as lighter sleep, increased movement during the night, and reduced time spent in slow wave and REM sleep. These are the stages of sleep where the body performs its most essential repair functions, muscle tissue is rebuilt, immune functions are reinforced, and growth hormone is released in its highest concentrations. By keeping the brain and body in a state of low-grade activation, nighttime digestion essentially reduces the efficiency of these recovery processes. You may be asleep for 7 or 8 hours, but the quality of that sleep is diminished, meaning your body doesn't fully capitalize on the opportunity to repair and rebuild. The gut is also deeply connected to your immune system. Nearly 70% of the immune cells in your body reside in or around your gut lining. Nighttime is a critical period when the immune system conducts surveillance and repair. However, when digestion is ongoing, especially if it's triggered by heavy or fatty meals, it can shift immune resources toward dealing with food breakdown and inflammation in the gut rather than systemic recovery. This trade-off may sound minor, but over time it adds up. You're pulling biological resources away from full body repair and channeling them into late-night digestion, which is not an ideal use of energy or cellular focus during rest. Additionally, there is increasing evidence that gut microbiota, the trillions of bacteria that live in your digestive tract, follow their own circadian rhythms. These microbial populations cycle in accordance with your feeding schedule and sleep-wake cycles, producing different metabolites depending on the time of day. When you eat at irregular or late times, you disrupt these microbial rhythms. This disruption can alter the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA, which are critical for mood regulation and sleep initiation. A misaligned or unhealthy gut microbiome, in turn, can feed back to the brain through the gut-brain axis, leading to increased sleep latency, nighttime awakenings, and even low-level anxiety or restlessness during sleep. This connection is especially concerning for individuals focused on muscle development or physical performance. The hormonal environment during deep sleep, particularly the release of testosterone and growth hormone, is one of the primary drivers of muscle repair and protein synthesis. If your sleep is shallow or fragmented due to late-night activation of the gut-brain axis, you may miss out on these hormonal surges. Even if you're otherwise doing everything right, eating enough protein, training consistently, and getting to bed at a reasonable hour. It's not just about how long you sleep, but how deeply and effectively you sleep that determines the quality of recovery. Another factor worth noting is that gastrointestinal activity can directly influence heart rate variability, HRV, which is a marker of parasympathetic nervous system activity and overall recovery. High HRV is associated with a calm, restorative state that is ideal for muscle growth and mental resilience. When you eat late at night, digestive processes increase sympathetic nervous system activity, which lowers HRV and shifts your body into a more stressed, alert state. This means that even as you lie still in bed, your body is not truly resting, it's working, processing, and staying slightly more alert than it should be. That translates to less efficient recovery and, over time, lower training output and slower progress. In practical terms, this all points to a simple but powerful strategy: stop eating at least 2 to 3 hours before going to sleep. Give your digestive system time to wind down. Let the gut-brain axis grow quiet. This allows the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest branch, to dominate without having to simultaneously manage actual digestion. The brain will enter deeper sleep, your hormonal systems will function more efficiently, and your muscle tissue will receive the full benefit of overnight repair. Ultimately, late-night eating doesn't just affect your digestion, it sends a ripple effect throughout the entire brain-body system. It keeps your nervous system alert, interferes with sleep architecture, alters hormonal release, and delays physical recovery. For anyone serious about performance, muscle growth, or mental clarity, respecting the timing of your final meal may be one of the simplest yet most effective tools to support deeper sleep and better recovery. What you eat, and more importantly, when you eat, has a profound impact on your body's ability to recover, grow, and function optimally. Late-night meals, especially those high in carbohydrates and fats, disrupt critical hormonal rhythms, blunt the natural release of growth hormone, misalign your internal clocks, and activate the gut-brain axis at precisely the wrong time. This internal conflict compromises sleep depth, reduces muscle repair, and slows your progress toward performance and health goals. By simply avoiding food for 2 to 3 hours before bed, you align your body systems for true rest, maximize anabolic hormone activity, and allow your brain and muscles the uninterrupted recovery they need. It's a small change in behavior that yields a significant return on investment for your energy, strength, and overall vitality.